Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a concept that absolutely dominates almost every waking moment of our adult lives. It shapes our identities, it dictates our daily schedules, and honestly, it's probably the main reason you woke up to an alarm this morning. I'm talking about the job. Most of us wake up, commute, log in, and trade our time for a wage without ever really questioning where this whole arrangement even came from. I know I used to think of having a job as just this biological default, like a permanent fixture of human existence. But the fascinating truth, hidden away in anthropological records and archaeological digs, is that the concept of a job is a shockingly recent human invention. For the overwhelming majority of human history, employment simply did not exist. So what did ancient humans actually do all day, and what does that tell us about the modern world we've built? Let's find out.
Okay, let's dive right into part 1, the hunter who barely worked, a Kalahari paradigm shift. To really understand this, we need to travel back to a very specific moment in time. Picture the Kalahari Desert in 1964. Anthropologist Richard Lee packed up his notebooks and headed there to ask a really simple, almost embarrassingly obvious question. What exactly do people do all day when there is no job to go to? He embedded himself with a foraging community called the Juhansi. Now, this was a community with no employer, no office, no factory whistle, and 0 shift calendars. Yet, beautifully, life just continued. Now, most outsiders at the time assumed that surviving in such a harsh environment had to require constant, desperate, backbreaking labor, but Lee decided to actually measure it. Through his careful observations, one man in the camp really stood out. His name was Nauma, and by every single account, Nauma was the hardest working adult in the entire foraging group. Over a 4-week stretch, Lee noted that Nauma went out tracking and hunting for food on 16 out of 28 days. Even at that incredibly active pace, Nauma's total time spent actively finding food came to about 32 hours across an entire week. He was the exception, literally the overachiever of the group in one of the most unforgiving climates on Earth. Which naturally brings us to the rest of the camp.
Now, here's the massive plot twist about human nature. When Richard Lee averaged out the data for the rest of the adults in the camp, he found that the average person worked roughly 2.5 days a week. They were putting in just 15 to 20 hours a week in direct food-getting activity. Let that sink in for a second. In an environment that everyone thought required constant toil, their subsistence labor was actually less, by a wide margin, than the standard 40-hour workweek that defines life in the industrialized world today.
This completely blew up the assumption that early human life was just constant, desperate toil. For centuries, philosophers and thinkers just assumed that pre-agricultural human life was exhausting and animal-like, famously described as nasty, brutish, and short. They thought early humans barely held starvation at bay, but Lee's numbers proved the exact opposite. Another anthropologist, Marshall Solins, later took this exact evidence and built a famous argument around it, dubbing hunter-gatherer societies the original affluent society. And he didn't mean affluent in the sense of owning a lot of stuff or having big bank accounts. He meant affluent in the sense that truly matters. They had enough resources to survive, and they had an absolute abundance of time. They weren't poor. They just had a completely different relationship to time and effort.
Moving right along to part 2, 95% of history. The math of human existence.
To truly appreciate how strange our modern lives are, we have to zoom out and just do the math. When we hear the phrase, no job, our modern reflex is almost always to picture aimless desperation or poverty. But for well over 95% of the time anatomically modern humans have existed on this planet, there was no job in the sense that we use the word today. There was no employer, no wage, and absolutely no fixed hours. There was simply subsistence. People got their food, secured their shelter, and maintained their safety on a schedule dictated by the weather, animal migrations, the changing of the seasons, and their own bodily rhythms. It was not dictated by an institution. The entirety of agrarian and industrial society, the era of the job, makes up a tiny, almost microscopic 5% sliver of our story.
Let's walk through this timeline to really put things into perspective. Anatomically modern humans have been walking the Earth for roughly 300,000 years. For almost all of that time, we were foragers. It wasn't until about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago that agriculture began, which was the first system that even slightly resembled scheduled specialized labor. But the concept of a commute, a fixed work week, the factory, and the wage, that is astonishingly recent. That crystallized only in the last 2 or 3 centuries with industrialization. Your 9 to 5 is a genuinely novel human invention. It is not some permanent feature of existence that hunter-gatherers were simply too primitive to figure out. It was built deliberately, out of very specific conditions that didn't even exist for most of our history.
So, if a forager in the Ice Age wasn't clocking a 40-hour week, what did they actually do with their time? Well, their hours certainly weren't empty, they just weren't organized around a wage. A huge portion of time went to what we'd call social labor. That's unpaid, invisible work like resolving disputes, telling stories, teaching children, and maintaining relationships. Making a bow or weaving a basket was practically a social engineering project, done while sitting around and chatting. Now, it's true that when later anthropologists factored in the time spent processing food and tending to camp chores, the total work time for groups like the Juhoansi crept up closer to 40 or 45 hours a week. But here is the amazing difference. It was entirely fluid. There was unstructured daytime sleep and plenty of idle rest. The sharp, anxious, all-consuming boundary between being on the clock and off the clock completely did not exist. Getting food was just one thread woven into the day, not the rigid organizing principle of their entire life.
Which brings us to part 3, the trap of agriculture, when work started eating the day. So, if foraging was so socially rich and fluid, why on earth did we ever start working dawn to dusk in fields? Something dramatic had to change to produce 6-day work weeks and the eventual 80-hour factory shifts of later eras. That pivotal change was the agricultural revolution, and this introduces a highly uncomfortable historical inversion because it totally challenges the story most of us were taught in school. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Farming didn't win out because it made individual lives better. In fact, for the average early farmer, it made life significantly harder. So why did it spread? Because a field of wheat could feed more mouths per acre than a foraging landscape ever could. Farming won out purely on total output capacity. It allowed communities to outpopulate and outcompete their foraging neighbors. It operated less as a conscious choice for a better life and more as an evolutionary trap. The system extracted more surplus from human effort, even if it meant worse nutrition and significantly longer, harder days for the individual doing the actual work.
And the archaeological proof of this transition is pretty grim, to be honest. When anthropologists look at the skeletons of populations that transitioned from foraging to farming, they see a measurable, painful rise in repetitive strain diseases. We're talking skeletons showing slipped discs, severe arthritis, and hernias from clearing land, hauling water, and endless plowing. Furthermore, because early farmers replaced a wide, diverse variety of wild foods with a small number of staple grains, their skeletons show distinct signs of malnutrition. The day became harder, it became way more repetitive, and the diet became vastly narrower.
Let's move along and see how this builds, because farming, despite its brutal physical toll, produced a surplus, and that started a massive chain reaction. Think about it. When you have more grain than the farmers need to eat, that surplus requires storage. Storage requires protection from rival groups. Protection requires organized force, and organized force requires someone in charge. Suddenly, these loosely egalitarian bands stratified into rulers and the ruled. Because the farmers grew excess food, other people were freed up to not farm at all. They became specialized potters, soldiers, priests, and record keepers. This right here is the birth of the economy. But keep in mind, these early jobs weren't free, contractual choices like we think of today. They were roles within a rigid hierarchy, often coerced and frequently indistinguishable from bondage, where labor was extracted from the many to support the specialized few.
Now for part 4, the invention of the clock, the final shape of the modern job. It would actually take thousands of years after the dawn of agriculture for the job to take the specific shape we recognize today. You know, a role you choose to enter, perform for a wage for an employer who doesn't literally own you. To find the final missing piece of the puzzle, we have to fast forward to late 1700s Britain, right at the dawn of industrialization. Before the factory, even in farming or artisanal work, labor was tied to the land, the household, the sun, and the changing seasons. Work and home were usually the exact same place, but the factory completely shattered that reality. Factory production required synchronized human effort. Machines ran on strict schedules, meaning workers had to arrive and leave exactly together. Suddenly, output was measured in hours, not in harvests. The ticking clock, rather than the rhythms of nature, became the ultimate boss. This era invented the spatial separation of work and home, the daily ritual of going to work and coming home from work. To someone living before 1800, the idea of selling a fixed block of your day every single day indefinitely to an employer totally separate from your family just to earn currency, it would have looked completely alien. Finally, part 5, why this matters right now. Reframing the emotional weight of work.
Now, we certainly aren't doing this deep dive just to romanticize the past.
Foraging life carried brutal risks, exposure to the elements, violence, and devastatingly high infant mortality. The surplus-based systems that cost us our unstructured time are the exact same systems that eventually gave us modern medicine and much longer life expectancies. But understanding that the job is just a recent invention is profoundly useful for dismantling a very specific myth, the myth that the job is a biological default. Now, realizing this doesn't make your rent, your groceries, or your mortgage payment any less real. I get it. In our cash economy, a period without a job is a genuine crisis, in a way it simply wasn't for Oma back in the Kalahari. But it does reframe the heavy emotional weight we carry, the shame of being between jobs, or that incredible modern pressure to tie your entire personal identity and self-worth to your job title. None of that is hardwired into human nature. It is merely a reflection of a recently built economic system. You are not biologically programmed to be defined by your employment.
For the overwhelming majority of our species' existence, humans fed themselves, raised children, engineered tools, and built rich, functioning societies without ever once clocking in. The job as we know it was simply a transitional tool, an institution built on top of surplus, hierarchy, and industrial synchronization to solve very specific historical problems. But history doesn't just stop here. The way we organize our time, our effort, and our survival is always evolving. The job was invented. So the absolute most exciting question we can ask ourselves today is, what will we invent next? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a whole new perspective the next time you look at the clock.